Okay. This is for RC, working on your Star Wars miniatures. Working on some A-Wings. We're just going to work on the colors today. So it looks like it's in groups of 3. So we're just going to do 3 at a time. Let's see where we get. Seems like it's a stripe down the middle and then engine cowling down the sides. This should actually be kind of a darker red. It's pretty good. Let's use this. Okay.
Eating a hell of a lot of the food.
Actually, I'm going to listen to a podcast instead. This guy's kind of bumming me out.
And the point you brought up in the essay was that people don't think it's rude to ask you to read their script. But you're like, well, that'd be like me asking a dentist, like, hey, can you just look at my teeth real quick?
Exactly.
That does happen to dentists, is the point.
Yeah, and I think it's fun. I mean, most of the response to that has been overwhelmingly positive over the years. I remember Roger Ebert tweeted it out about a year before he died, which was lovely. Every 6 to 9 months, somebody else resurrects it, and usually in a positive way. I've found there are occasionally. Should we wait until that goes by?
Yeah, I was going to say, air raid happening over there.
If there's a lot of that, I will move inside. God damn it.
Seems like something's happening nearby.
You done? You finished? I'm trying to record here.
Yeah.
I've been cooped up. I'm on a deadline.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Writing, and I've just been like cooped up for days. So it's like I'm going to sit on the porch. Yeah, I mean, every now and then there's some hostility to it, which, I understand a lot of it comes from the title, which is, I suppose, needlessly aggressive. If you read the article, people are always like, well, he shouldn't have said that to the guy. Read the article. I didn't say it to the guy. It's, I actually read his fucking thing, and that's why I wrote the article. But, it's one of those weird things because, I just sort of farted it out in response to a thing that happened and then didn't really know what to do with it. And then, a friend of mine was at the Village Voice who was like, hey, yeah, you should let me run it on our blog. And I was like, sure, why not? 200 people might see it. And, and for years he was on me. He's like, do that again. And I'd be like, Tony, you can't do that on purpose,
Get another viral essay.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I remember the day I got up and it was just like, you get on Facebook and the entire newsfeed of Facebook was the same photograph of me and scrolling down forever. Like, what the fuck happened? But it was interesting. It's a weird thing knowing what's going to be on your gravestone.
It's a long time to read someone's script. You know, it's a pretty big deal.
It is. It's a commitment, and if you want someone to do it seriously, it's it's time, it's energy, it's all the rest of that, and I do it all the time. It's just what I was, and one of the other things that seems to get lost by people who get offended at the title and don't read the article is they're like, oh, so he doesn't read anybody's scripts? I'm like, no, I just won't read scripts for complete fucking strangers who walk up to me in public and pigeonhole me into doing work for them, How is that controversial?
You script him for something, like one of those. That's what I used to use when I first started writing. It's to pay those companies for them to read me. I get people.
Every now and then there's a working pro who's like, well, I present that, I read for anybody, and I'm always like, I'm by nature a fairly nice guy. I always kind of want to just sort of, go on Twitter or something and go, hey, everybody, this guy will read your script. Please send him everything you've got. He's dying to read it. It's like, come on, no, you won't. Nobody will. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. Nobody reads scripts for complete fucking strangers.
Well, maybe taking a step back before we start getting into some unmade movies. Well, I was going to say, maybe we'll talk briefly about just kind of the beginning of your career and what led up to A History of Violence and people wanting you to read their screenplays. Of kind of going from being just somebody trying to make it to now being a known screenwriter. It's hard to be a known screenwriter, even when you are a known screenwiter. We're all, you're aware of the fact that you're not really known. Yeah, you're not known like an actor might be.
Yeah. I got to once, several years back, it was really nice. The New Beverly asked me to host a week of screenings and double features, just of movies I curated. It was an incredible honor, and it was so much fun. And I'd go to the New Beverly, and we showed these great films. It was usually packed. I remember my girlfriend at the time we just started dating. She goes, "Wow, you're famous." And I was like, "I'm famous for maybe one square block. It's like you cross the street from the New Beverly, no one knows who I am. But pretty much everybody in the world who knows who I am is in this theater right now."
Did you show A Boy and His Dog?
Oh yeah.
Because I have a very distinct memory, and that was when Harlan came out for it.
Yeah, Harlan came for that,
and he'd injured his back. I just remembered that every 5 minutes he would swear really loud when he would get a spasm.
Yeah, probably. That was fun. And then, we showed that with May the Earth Caught Fire afterwards. I remember that.
Good double bill. But what was kind of looking back to the olden days for you? Did you just straight up move out to LA like so many of us, or did you get started?
Yeah, no, I did. I was in film school and kind of hating it because in Philadelphia, I shouldn't have had their great school, Temple University. But I had made more movies, sort of on my own as a kid with a Super 8 camera than I did in film school. And I took a couple of really great theory classes that were actually in the English department that were probably, to this day still put me in good stead with my work. But after about 2 years of that, the opportunity came to come out here and work as a PA on an independent film. I basically dropped out of school, dropped everything, got on a plane and moved. And by the time I got here, it never happened. By the time I got out here, the film had lost its financing, but the producer was on the old, it's now the Culver Studios. It was called Laird at the time. And I got me on a lot, and there were all these different independent productions. So I just went door to door, please. And it's a crazy story. I walked into the offices of the Canon Film Masters of the Universe.
Oh, wow.
And I found out a couple weeks later that Ed Pressman, who was one of the producers, had a friend who was a publisher in New York who had a son named Josh, and somehow they thought I was him. And by the time the real Josh had shown up, I had worked, I'd been on it for 2 weeks, had not left, had not slept, had not eaten, had just worked my head. They were like, fuck it, let's keep it. So I spent...
Were you aware during those 2 weeks that they thought you were someone else, or was that...
No, because it was not. It was just literally like, my friend's got a kid named Josh, you should hire him. No, he's got a job here. And
I want to hear Masters of the Universe stories one day.
Talking about movies that shouldn't have been made. That was a fun experience. And I spent several years working crew. And always with an eye, the idea was to get the education, actually doing the job that I didn't get at film school. And and then just sort of segued into writing slowly but surely. I ended up selling a script to some independent producers who started out with high aspirations, and then by the time it was done, it was a new image film on one of Avi Lerner's companies. And this movie that had originally been Peter Medak was going to direct, Gabriel Byrne, Stephen Ray in the leads, became a guy who directed a bunch of straight-to-video action films, Casper Van Dien and Robert Mitchum's grandson.
Wait, what was the title?
It's called On the Border.
Okay.
My father still insists it's a good movie, and it's always, to me, it's the most undiluted expression of a father's love I'll ever receive, because boy, is it not a good movie. And then I just sort of worked in those minds for several years. I did a couple of pictures with Mark Lester, which was a blast. And then, all the while doing that, kind of writing crappy straight-to-video action movies by day, and then at night trying to write slightly better studio brand feature specs, and eventually sold one to Paramount, and that kind of put me on the map as a legit theatrical feature writer.
Which one was that?
That was a project called Three Gun Blues. It was a remake of. It's so funny when the sort of whole defund the police thing started happening, and people started sort of looking at cop films and sort of all the damage they had done over the years, which is I tend to subscribe to that view, even though there are a few cop films I really love. I realize I've only in my life ever written one cop film, and it was a modern day remake of the Three Musketeers, set in the LAPD, and not just the Three Musketeers, but specifically Richard Lester's Three Musketeers. So all the characters are named after the actors who were in the greatest Three Musketeers movies ever made.
Oh, nice.
And it was fun. It was in development forever, and then and tonally it was very consciously a Walter Hill film, and it was so bizarre because that tone seemed to mystify people. There were some folks in the studio who got it and loved it, and then there were others who were like, is it a comedy, is it this, is it that? And it just sort of, like a lot of things, it got developed and then sort of frittered out, and then there was a change in administrations, and then about a year or two later, I heard they were bringing in some comedy writers to try to figure it out. And, nothing ever happened. But literally the first job I got after that, once I was sort of in the game, was History of Violence. So,
and was that the kind of thing where they're like, "Hey, we got the rights to this comic. What would you do with it?"
Yeah, New Line had the rights to the book. I gotta find a new way to tell this story. I feel like I've told it so often, but the executive at New Line had been I first met him. He was my agent's assistant, my first real agent, and had been a big supporter of my stuff. And now he was an exec at New Line. And I don't think I told this. I feel like enough time has gone by. I'm allowed to say this sort of thing. He and I had a conversation about the book about a year earlier. He knew I had read it, and we had this sort of relationship that he very much wanted to get me into New Line, but he also liked to sort of bust my balls. So he called me about a book he knew I didn't like. And the whole thing was the shortest version possible is like, he's like, come on in, pitch your take on this. You're not going to get the job. We're talking to a bunch of A-list writers, but I just want my people here to get to know you so we can bring you in on something where you have a chance. And the freedom of not having to actually try to get the job and just try to dazzle them with my charm or whatever was, I went, fuck it. And I pitched them the movie that I would have made, the story I would have come up with if I had been brilliant enough to come up with that title and that premise, because it's a great title and a great premise. And I guess their feelings about it were similar to my own, because they ended up not going with any of the big A-list writers and hiring the new guy. So.
Classic example where sometimes getting on the thing is the.
And I guess the funny thing was, I hadn't even thought of it. I was talking to my wife about it the other day. It was made very clear to me, you're not going to get the job. But come in and do it. And then when I found out Cronenberg wanted to do it, they were like, yeah, but he's not going to get the job. His last film had grown, he made Spider before that, which was $400,000. because who expects a Ray Fiennes movie about a schizophrenic gibbering around London with no plot to make any? It wasn't meant to be a hit, And so, I was the guy who wasn't supposed to get the job writing it. He was the guy who wasn't supposed to get the job directing it. Look how that worked.
They kind of reinvented him in a way.
Yeah. For a while, there was that sort of interesting. They did the
Vigo phase. Yeah,
sort of the Vigo years. Yes.
And then, obviously getting nominated for an Academy Award, pretty exciting.
That was fun.
And I've seen you say in interviews that you felt very confident you were going to lose to Brokeback Mountain, which kind of emotionally freed you up to just be like, hey, this is just pretty fun.
It's a great ride to go on if you don't have that tension hanging over you. And by the way, none of us had that tension hanging over us, but there were people who I guess didn't know that. And they seemed to be not to be having the kind of great time that the rest of us were. But it's like, here's the good news. You're going to get to travel around the world and be feted like a friggin' king and stay in the finest hotels and hang out in bars with George Clooney and Heath Ledger and go to award shows and be on TV and get interviewed by Joan Rivers. Here's the bad news. You're going to have to lose an award to Larry McMurtry and Diana Osana. And you're like, sign me up.
You're like, that's okay.
And for 4 months, you have an excuse not to work,
That's true.
Yeah, I was on an assignment, but they're like, what are we going to do? We're going to harass him. He's up for an Oscar. So.
And a question I always like to ask, if you can remember, do you remember because I'm sure, going from not being nominated for an Oscar to being nominated for an Oscar is a bit of a career kick. Do you remember what your first, either the first kind of big meeting or the first project someone brought to you after that, where you could kind of feel like, ooh, I'm at now a different level of being taken seriously?
Oh, yeah, no, in fact, my girlfriend got me some, you can go to, I don't know if you still can, the Converse All-Star website, and you can have them personalize a pair of sneakers for you for like $15. It's not a big deal. But she got a couple of pairs of sneakers for me with the JOB emblazoned on them, because I remember going to meetings and people kept saying, we want to be in the Josh Olson business. And that just cracked me up. It was weird. It was weird. And I mean, it's fun, but then at the same time, you start to realize you're now in the world where, at least for a little while, you can't be sure if, did they bring you in because they actually like your writing, or did they just bring you in because now you have that asterisk?
Yeah, now your name appears on a different list for them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that's a kind of recurring thing that you sort of run into. You have to kind of be in it, I think, to fully get it, but it's like, because people are like, oh, yeah, it must be easy. You're like, no, it's still as hard as it ever was, and now you're not sure, It's, because somebody read a script of yours and like, oh, this is amazing, we got to work with you. Like, you're not going to call me if you don't mean that. But, yeah, there was something, yeah.
Did you ever have a moment where, it's fairly specific, but of something where it was an idea or a script even that you'd already shown to a specific producer or executive that they didn't like before, and now all of a sudden they seem to get it? Or
not really, because I hadn't done too much before that, in that world. I had sold the spec, and it didn't budge that. But yeah, I don't think there was anything that kind of got resurrected because of it.
And then how soon? I'm trying to remember the dates in my mind. Steve will be better at this part. But how soon did Halo pop up for you then? After?
I think was Halo. Yeah, you tell me, Steve. Was Halo 2008? I think.
Well, it was announced in 2005, February.
Well, that was the original. I came onto it. They had I think gone through a bunch of writers on, all working off of earlier scripts. Was it?
Alex Garland.
I never saw the Alex Garland script. There was sort of a decision to start from scratch.
Oh, okay. Which writers you followed up by any chance, or you?
All of them. I'm the last writer.
Oh, you were the last. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. I wish I could say I had something to do with that, but it just sort of ended.
Well, when you were, Steve, maybe just quick for the audience, in case people have no idea, but can you maybe just give a little info on the Halo project?
yeah, I mean, like I was just saying, it was announced February 4th, 2005. And then February 6th, 2005, the Alex Garland script first draft was complete. And then June 6th, the famous story happened where Alex Garland's script went out to the studios. And
Right, with the guys in the outfits.
Yeah, dressed as Master Chief, guarding the script, and execs had 2 hours to read it and make their decision, right?
All the messengers waited outside for them, dressed in armor. Like, that story is so crazy.
Whenever I hear a story, though, like that, the thing I think about is what that was like for the people wearing the Master Chief outfits. Were those just PAs? Were they actors? I wonder.
They were asked not to say a word or do anything, and one of them, I think, was about to pass out, and he had to sit down. That was the last story I heard. But I guess the big problem is that, like you guys were just saying, they had 2 hours to read the script, and also Microsoft had these crazy demands. Like, they wanted $10 million upfront fee for rights, approval over cast and director, and they wanted 60 first-class plane tickets for Microsoft representatives and their guests at the movie premiere. And so, all of a sudden,
they got their priorities right.
Yeah.
And then, it was to 5 studios, and then the next day, DreamWorks and Paramount and New Line dropped out, and 20th Century Fox and Universal were the last 2 studios in. And then, let me see, and then, it
was Universal when I got to it.
It was Universal with you, and then little by little, the New York Times wrote a big article how the studios were upset by the way they handled it. And then, let's see, I'll just fast forward. And then Peter Jackson eventually came on board to be a producer on it. I think they wanted him to direct, but he wanted to produce.
Well, when you came on, was Neil Blomkamp still attached to
he was the director. He was, so my agents called me up and asked me, they're all very excited because, oh shit, here we go again.
Pause.
That's kind of
It's the same
great.
one, he's going the other way now.
Yeah, at least he's happy.
By the way, Blomkamp came on a year later. August 2006, he was attached.
Let's wait for the siren to go away. This reminds me of making movies when I was a kid because we lived by the airport, so it was always like a plane would go by. Kind of like that moment in Wayne's World where they're in the street in the car playing hockey and the cars come by and they're like, car, game on.
So my agents called me up and they're all excited. They're like, hey, Peter Jackson's in town and I'd love to meet with you to talk about writing Halo. And I got to apologize in advance because there's not a lot to my Halo story.
It's okay.
If you're looking for the riveting narrative and guys showing up in the middle of the night with bags full of money and coke and guns, this is not. But
I think the mundane details are sometimes the ones we like.
And when I met him at the, I want to see, is that the Bel Air Hotel? Beverly Hills Hotel. It was the Beverly Hills Hotel. And I was like, they're like, look, it's the first meeting's just kind of preliminary thing. Really, all you got to do is you and Peter just, if you guys get along, you get the job. Which was nice to hear because I'm a huge fan of his going way back. I hear there's finally going to be a director's cut of Dead Alive coming out on Blu-ray. So wow, I can't wait. When's that hitting?
Rated cut.
Yeah, but I'm a giant fan of his going way back and sort of tapped into a lot of the same stuff he is. And I was like, odds are we're going to get along. I mean, I don't mean that as I'm so great to love me. I was just like, this is
kind of guy.
Yeah, And we get there, we got along great in this conversation, and then he asked me, do you play the game? I go, yeah, I play the game. And then he asked me, and do you watch the cutscenes? Do I need to explain what those are to your listeners?
No, I think
they're nerds. They're nerds. And I remember thinking about this beforehand, and I was like, there wasn't enough time, because I got to call him a day and a half later at the meeting. There wasn't enough time to sort of absorb all that stuff. I thought, I'm not going to lie to Peter Jackson because he'll find the fuck out. And if I lie to him and I get down to New Zealand and that's when they find out, that's bad for my career. That's a bad thing to do as well. So I was like, I'm going to tell the truth. I was like, honestly, I just play to blow shit up. I don't play the cutscenes. And he smiled and he went, great, me too. And I thought, okay, good. Then we were off and running, and I got the job. It was that easy. But
it's amazing. I was telling Josh before the show, I was like, I played Halo 2 through Reach, and I can't tell you what it's about.
my friends and I, back when people used to still have LAN parties, but for our younger viewers who maybe don't know, that was pre-internet when your friends, you would all bring your own Xbox and your own TV, and you would like make a really nerdy basic circle or whatever spread out around the room, all connect together and just like fight each other in the versus mode. So I had very little familiarity with the actual story of the first.
Look, here's how I kept calling him Master Cylinder. I could not remember that guy's name for the life of me.
So were you starting over, like you were just starting the kind of page one rewrite?
Starting from scratch. Yeah, Neil had a few ideas of sort of, mostly they were structural. It was going to be set in, three different locations, sort of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 1 was there was a lot of stuff, a lot of his design ideas, which obviously you'd seen before in Straight Outta Johannesburg is short and other stuff, but a lot of his design ideas for Earth in the first act kind of ended up in District 9 later, just the look of it and everything. It was going to be kind of like that. And then it was, so it was I mean, do you want me to get into it? Or?
Yeah, I'm just curious because I've read the Alex Garland script, which we don't need to go into. That can be its own episode. But just for listeners, that was very faithful to the story of the game. So in that sense, it was a good script, but games and movies are such different things that it definitely has the feeling, I guess you would say a hat on a hat, where it's like Marines fighting this alien race, but then there's a secret alien base made by a third kind of alien that has a fourth kind of alien on it, it just kind of keeps going. So I'm curious what you're kind of starting over, especially with the idea that you just were almost using the aesthetic of the game and less of the actual story.
Yeah, I mean, I think they had a lot of sort of the broad strokes narrative stuff. I just didn't know who the characters were and sort of the general stuff in terms of the actual kind of. I guess there are novels now based on that.
Wow,
but no idea. But so I and I'll be honest, it's the attractions of the job were number one, work with Peter Jackson. Number two, all expense paid. Luxury trip to New Zealand, and number three, write the Halo movie. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, and I don't tend to work like that, and I've done that, but this was sort of such a cool thing. I was like, fuck,
I don't think anyone would fault you that.
but it's, and I guess it would be a terrible thing to say if it was, you know what? If it was about like Lord of the Rings, if I were like, I want to work with Peter Jackson, go to New Zealand, fuck Lord of the Rings, who gives a shit? Like, you don't want that guy writing Lord of the Rings, but yeah, I kind of think like with Halo, having someone who was not particularly devoted to the material was not a bad idea, and none of us were, but we were interested in making a cool movie. You know what I mean? It's like, remember when you're a kid, you'd come over to your friend's house and they had cooler toys than you do, and you'd be like, ooh, now I can play with their toys. I wish I could have their toys for a week. I could come up with cooler stuff to me. Well, here we were. We had this cool Halo shit, and now we get to play with it. And I get to play with it with, Peter and his team and Neil, and it was an incredible group. And got to New Zealand, and we would go to Peter's house every day, and I've said this before, and I don't know if people care or not, but it really meant a lot to me just in terms of my affection for him and my perception of him. You go to a lot of houses of, filmmakers and various sundry people who are operating at the level that Peter Jackson is. And you walk around their house and you're like, where does anyone live? It just looks like every room is curated with its own maid that cleans it every 5 minutes, and it all looks like a set. There's just no sign of life. And Peter's house is big and it's beautiful and it's nice and it's fucking lived in. You walk into the house in the morning, you can smell that they just make dinner for the kid or breakfast for the kids, and books are on tables half read, and it's like a human being lives here. It's like he actually lives in his house. That seriously, you spend enough time around a lot of people like that, it really starts counting that, because some of them, I swear to God, they just go into their pods when you're not around. They don't actually live there. and it was oh my god, so Fran and Philippa and Peter, and then Neil, and we would sit in his study, and he's a giant study, and had fucking Oscars everywhere you could see staring down at you, but it looked like a big study that somebody lived packed with books, and we just got to work, kind of trying to break the story, and that was kind of it. We chugged along. I was down there for I think 2 weeks, and then about 8 days into it, it was like, okay, stand by. We're dealing with some bullshit with Microsoft, and then I basically just spent a couple of days sort of sticking around the hotel waiting to hear what was going on, and it was they were just having a hard time getting Microsoft to kind of grasp that they were making a Peter Jackson film, which was really frustrating. I'm not sure what their issues were. I know that they felt like I was probably not even seeing people anymore. It's not like they're beating down my door or vice versa to hire me again. So they didn't hire me anyway. When I worked for Universal, they were great. They didn't seem to get that Peter Jackson was kind of the bigger name in movies than Halo. And I remember at one point the studio commissioned just a sort of a poll for them, and it was like gauging the interest of Halo the motion picture, which was let's say X, and Peter Jackson's Halo the motion picture, which was X cubed, just to try to get across to Microsoft. It was like, you can't treat this guy like some schmuck programmer you hired to fix one of your cutscenes. This is Peter fucking Jackson. And I know that stuff eventually just got to a point where it just killed the project, which was frustrating because we were chugging along and having a great time. So it was like 7 or 8 days working with all of them, and then a couple days waiting to find out what was going on, and then quick farewell, back on the plane, back home.
And what was the version, as much as you can remember? Obviously, it was a little while ago, but you know that it's an Alex Garland thing. We never see Earth. Was Earth now in play?
Yeah. It starts on Earth. There was a kid who I don't think was. I think that was our creation. And when I say our, I don't mean editorial. I mean somebody in the room. It could have been me, could have been Frank, could have been Peter. Someone was like, "There's this kid who's going to get involved eventually with Master Cylinder, Master Chief, and end up in this fight with." It's pretty good. I'm a terrible guess. I did no research coming in. I was like, I lived it. The Dominion, is that a thing? The bugs? Yeah, the little bug creatures are like, I think they're called.
There's the Flood. Was that still?
The Flood.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, are the Dominion the aliens? I don't know. But it was like,
I'm trying to remember, because again, there's 3 different, there's the aliens they're fighting. There's long dead aliens that the aliens they're fighting worship as God, and then there's the Flood, which are the
that's it.
Parasite creatures.
They end up on a planet where I think it's just like Master Chief. I kept doing this while we were working. No one thought it was funny because they were all foreign. They didn't know Master Cylinder. Master Chief. And this kid, and is there there's some sort of Tinkerbell, like a holographic Tinkerbell character.
Cortana, who's like the AI that's uploaded in Master Chief's suit.
Right.
Wait, the Covenant, I think.
The Covenant, the Flood, Cortana, it's all coming back. I did get a brief tour of Weta with Peter, which was amazing.
Oh, man.
The one. We'll get back to Halo in a minute. Just my one takeaway. Do people know this? They had all these models of characters they had built for mostly Lord of the Rings. There was some Kong stuff there, and there were a ton of models for Halo, which were amazing. They were using 3D printers. It was like early 3D printers to build some of the props. But the is it Balrog? What's the big giant creature in the first Lord of the Rings?
Flaming one.
No, I guess it's not the Balrog. It's the sort of the big bald thing that beats the hell out of him in the first film. But they had one of those there. That was the first time I noticed it, and then I noticed with all the others. They all have genitals. They cover them up in the films and everything, but
not at Weta.
Not at Weta, yeah. A lot of penises at Weta is all I'll say, but none of them real. And yeah, so it was gonna be this kid kid in this kind of District 9 looking Earth ends up on a ship, for whatever reason, I don't even remember. And they end up on this planet. Is it a
ring planet?
There's some. I know people like this. There are aspiring screenwriters listening to this who've read every Halo book and played every game. They're like, that motherfucker doesn't know anything.
They're like, that's the name of the movie. It's Halo.
Oh, is that it? The planet is Halo? Okay, there you go. It's round, right? It's a ring. But it's a ring.
Like Discworld, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And so they were going to end up on that thing, battling the aliens, and then slowly discover that there were the Flood. They're going to battle aliens and the Flood at the same time, and Master Cylinder's got to wrestle with his own humanity. We were very committed to never showing his face.
Oh,
that was never going to happen. And I know there was some controversy around it, not around our decision, but there was all this I think to show his face, or that. I was like, no, we're not.
Like Dread. Did you get the chance to see the Warthog at Weta or any of?
Oh yeah. That's the Jeep, right?
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Because they were building weapons and everything too, right?
They built weapons. They built one of the aliens, which I still have a photo of around somewhere. And but they had made the truck, and they made a bunch of the guns, and they made some of the aliens. So.
In District 9, the weaponry reminded me of Halo. Could you tell that was reused from Halo, or
it could be? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. It was my first introduction to a 3D printer, which is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, it's very Star Trek, I'd imagine, especially back then.
They had a tiny Naomi Watts that they had done up for King Kong. It was amazing because it was maybe an inch high. And you look at it, it was like, holy shit, that's Naomi Watts. And they would just shrink it down,
Did you by chance hear any of the controversy about Blumkamp? Because I think that was the other rumor that was going around. Or not rumor? It was kind of put in the press that they weren't happy. They wanted kind of Jackson to direct it, but they weren't too sure about Blumkamp.
Oh, really? By the time I got on, he was Peter's guy, and he was great. I loved him. We had dinner a couple times, and it got along great. And his shorts are amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think Blumkamp, I know, he had a horrible time, as far as what he said in interviews.
I'm sure what he put up with from them and dealt with. Yeah, because if they were disrespecting Peter Jackson, just imagine how they were treating this guy who directed some shorts. But no, he has great story sense. There was clearly no question that he could handle the sort of visual end of it. And the one thing I'm confident of is that if we had been allowed to finish the work, it would have been a good movie. Whether or not, I guarantee you there would be Halo fans out there, but fuck that movie.
Well, according to the short you made, that Halo one, Landfall, it's incredible. Because I was always like, what's a Halo movie gonna be like? But then when I saw his short, it was just mind blowing.
Which was made out of test footage they did for the movie, right, Steve?
Right.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. But it was incredible. He nailed it. Nailed it. It bums me out.
Yeah. No, he's a great filmmaker, a great guy. What's going on? His alien isn't happening. Is that right? Or
I can't imagine. Who knows if it'll. That's a whole other episode.
Yeah. We could still use it. The designs looked incredible for that one.
And maybe jumping around now to just some other things. I know one thing I've always found, just looking at it from afar, like I said, I went to that Harlan Ellison screening, and I remember you wrote a great obit for him in the WGA magazine after he passed, sadly. But just your whole relationship with him, it's inspiring. I'm sure it was for you, but even just for other people to know the idea of befriending somebody who was so influential on you growing up, both creatively and personally. And I'm just curious about any unmade projects you guys might have had, because I know you worked on a lot of things together.
No, there were a lot of conversations about things. First things first. It was insane. It was, and I've talked about this before, so I'll try to brief in case people have heard this crap. But, I was sort of coming to the end of the Oscar nomination thing, and you're really like, things are going to go back to some vestige of normal soon. Have I managed to make the most of it? And I thought, oh, wait, I would love to meet Harlan Ellison. Thank him. Just thank him. He was the writer who made me want to be a writer. Literally had an English teacher in 9th grade, gave me one of his books. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And I called up, actually, production designer on Masters of the Universe.
See, it's
William Stout. Yeah. And Bill Stout, my first boss, lovely guy, knew Harlan well. And I called him up and I said, Bill, I want to put you in a spot. Say no if you don't. But, would you just check, if Harlan even knows my movie, let alone liked it. If you did, tell the guy who wrote it, we'd just love to buy him lunch to thank him. I guess call up 2 minutes and Bill goes, Harlan wants you to come up to the house. And it was the next day, and we just sat and talked for hours. And there was just this moment where Harlan just stopped in the middle and smiled. And he said, I like you, kid. You're my kind of person. And I just remember this sort of double-edged, on the one hand, you're like, holy shit. And on the other hand, you're like sort of have to be, because I spent my formative years stuffing my fat head full of his stuff. It's sort of, if I didn't turn out his kind of person, it would be really weird. And we just, it just became this incredible friendship. I mean, we talked every day. We saw each other at least once a week. We, just constant, I get these phone calls at 3 a.m. and, he just wanted to ramble on and no one else was up. And it's a weird thing. I remember a couple years into it, I was thinking about buying a house, and I get this frantic call from Harlan. He's like, you got to come up here. The house across the street's for sale. And I go and I look, and it wasn't a part of town I wanted to live in necessarily. It was beautiful. He lives up in the hills over Sherman Oaks, but just not where I wanted to be. And I'm walking around. It's kind of a nice house. But imagine going from oh my God, Harlan Ellison is this god who walks the earth like a man who I would kill just to spend, if I could just get him to read one page I've written and tell me what he thinks of it, that'd be amazing. To going, oh, fuck, if I buy this house, Harlan will be over all the fucking time.
That's a sitcom.
It really is. And he would have been, and I told him that. So, but yeah, I mean, I introduced him at many events. I was not being funny. People thought I was, as my second father and my first child. And he was both those things. But just the dearest friend, and one of the just best human beings I've ever known. I know some people find him problematic, and I get it, but a lot of Harlan was just you just had to get the wavelength he was on. I've seen him blow up in what seemed to be extreme rage at people, but it's one of the funniest things you've ever seen. And he sort of assumed you got the joke, and if you didn't get the joke, fuck you. It's I
imagine his rage being a little bit like Mr. Costanza on Seinfeld, but
it could be over the top, but I don't know, for some reason, I've never seen anybody else make fun of his height and live to tell the tale. I did it all the time. I've written with him. We wrote an episode of an anthology TV show called Masters of Science Fiction, which was an amazing experience. It's worth looking out for. We got Brian Dennehy and John Hurt, directed by Jonathan Frakes. Just an incredible experience. But I had made progress with him over the years, because he was a real stickler about his material, and rightly so. And Harlan was very much a prose stylist. He was someone who was, screenwriters are, I think, naturally collaborative, and short story writers and novelists are God, And so the whole concept of other people coming in and bringing their creativity to a thing always kind of rubbed him a little wrong. And I had finally, I think, gotten it through his I had definitely got through his. I kept telling him, I was like, look, someone's going to make a movie of one of your things and I get some detail wrong and you're going to hate it. You're going to badmouth it forever. I go, you need to get over that, because what we need to do is sell your stuff. You want Hollywood to do to you what they did to Philip K. Dick. Basically, take your best material, mangle it, dumb it down, so that 98% of the people on the planet know your name, but have no actual clue as to why you're so great, because all they've seen are the stupid movies, and you're going to cash these giant checks. And he liked that. And we got down the road with a couple of projects over the years, and every time just Harlan would start to emerge. It would be like, you run with a kid, you got creative freedom.
Ah.
And then we sort of start to get into it. He's like, well, here's what needs to happen. I'm like, Harlan, you get a creative freedom. Yeah, but you're going to fuck it up if you do it that way. And so I'd say the few things, and I learned my lesson, but every couple of years I get ahead of steam up and go, let's try to do this now. And it would all kind of crash and burn. It was fine. It was an excuse.
What was the one of his either stories or novels that you thought could make a really great movie?
Well, we were working briefly for a little while on The Star Lost, his terrible TV show from the 70s, which was based on a great script and great idea. It just got completely mangled, and he had the rights to it. And he had recently published it as a graphic novel called Phoenix Without Ashes, which is a really, really cool idea. And the idea of doing it as a TV show was sort of natural. Which is the shortest version possible. It's a story of these kids living what appears to be sort of, Amishville. It's hard to tell when it is. Is it 18th century? Is it 19th century? And they have this kind of forbidden love, and it catches up with them, and the boy is going to be punished, probably killed for having this thing with the wrong girl. And he runs away, and he discovers this steel door in the ground, and he goes into it, and it takes him into this control room, and he realizes that the world he has grown up in is actually a spaceship. And it's part of a giant collection of kind of these globes in which we find out that the planet Earth has been destroyed hundreds of years ago, and all these different cultures and communities each got a globe and created sort of a world within. And it's been going on for so long that everyone's forgotten. And so all these different weird cultures and groups and times are on this giant ship, and none of them know they're on a ship. And 500 years ago, there was an accident, and the thing is slowly heading towards the sun. And so this kid and the girl have to kind of make their way to all these other worlds, convince everybody that they're actually on a spaceship, and that they have to learn how to steer the thing out of the sun.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So,
am I remembering correctly? Harlan himself has kind of famous unmade adaptation of an Asimov book.
Oh yeah, iRobot.
And I think they published that. Yeah.
I believe there was a while you could go to Best Buy and you could buy the Blu-ray for the Will Smith movie, and it had the Harlan script attached to it, implying that there was any connection whatsoever. Of course, there's none.
That's pretty good.
Any talk like a Boy and the Dog remake or sequel or anything?
We kicked it around a couple times. There was thought of a TV show, which would be kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But it never got beyond kind of the conversation stages. But yeah, that would have been fun.
Yeah.
I was also going to say something. I don't remember where I read this, but either you're working on it now or in the past you were working on something with Mick Jagger.
Yeah. So the first thing was just several years ago. I got hired to write a script with him based on an idea he had, which was an amazing experience. Film, didn't get made, may still, although it's completely transformed. It was a project called Tabloid. It kind of got killed when Nightcrawler, the Jake Paul movie, came out. There were some similarities there. But years later, several years later, just recently, in the last year, I still haven't figured out the most concise way to discuss this. A couple years ago, I wrote an audio drama, technically a podcast called Bronzeville, and it was a fantastic project. It was one of the best times I've ever had. I wrote every episode of this thing. It's sort of old-time radio. Each episode's about 45 minutes long. It's about the numbers racket in Chicago in the 40s, and it's Lawrence Fishburne, Lorenz Tate, and Tika Sumter, and Amari Hardwick, this amazing cast. And in fact, I just heard the second season, which I also wrote every episode of, which is coming out shortly. It's now done. Really, really proud of it. Really fun, and a really, really exciting medium. I grew up listening to records of old-time radio shows. And I always kind of loved them as a kid. They're like movies in your head. And the opportunity to do this was a really interesting challenge. And I have always wanted to work with fish. And so it was an opportunity to do that, which was just an absolute dream come true. And I had such a good time doing it that I wanted to kind of do more in that arena. And found out, kind of meeting with other companies that do it, that do audio drama, that they all kind of suck. There's not a huge amount of money up front, which is fine, but they all wanted to do masses of rounds and rounds of notes on every outline, and then now rounds and rounds of notes on every episode. And you're like, there's a reason you get paid a lot of money in TV. It's to put up with that shit. But if you're not going to pay me the TV money, there's got to be a concession, you know? Mm-hmm. And basically, my friend Allison Anders, a great filmmaker, had this show that she thought would make an interesting, dramatic podcast. And I agreed, and she asked me if I wanted to produce it. And knowing nothing about producing, I was like, sure. And we took it around all these companies, and they kept coming back. So these, everybody wanted it. They all wanted to, put us through these incredible paces to do it. And we were like, it's not worth it, And I just had this sort of simple idea of like, someone should start a podcast studio where, we do audio dramas, and we go after, established talent, because you want people who have proven they can do it and are cognizant of their own limitations and so forth. And find their, like, what's their passion project? Matt Weiner was chugging around for like 10 years, making a living as a great TV writer. He had Mad Men in his back pocket. And, I've been that guy. I know how insane your agents get when it's like, so it's time to go out with a new TV spec. You're like, yeah, let's go out with Mad Men again. They're like, dude, nobody wants your show about advertising execs in the 60s. And you're like, yeah, I don't care. We're going out with it again. You're like, oh, Christ, all right. So we want to find those people before they've spent 10 years doing that, and we'll produce your show. You write it. The buck stops with you creatively. It's like let's find these writers, trust that they're good. Let's not note them to death. Let's allow them to like own the property that they created, and and hopefully in success goes on to be a TV show, and we get to produce it. So. It seemed like a pretty simple idea, just like let's start a studio where we treat writers well. And I bounced it off a really good friend of mine who passed away, sadly, a couple weeks ago, Steve Bing. I had worked with him on a couple of projects. We did a Willie Nelson thing together years ago. It was a blast. And Steve was just one of the best people I've ever known, and loved writers. He'd been a sweetheart.
Willie Nelson's script?
Yeah, I wrote it. Yeah. We can talk about that in a minute. Another unmade film. I got a million of them. But Steve loved the idea and called up Kevin Tsujihara, who was at the time the head of Warner Brothers, since not anymore, and pitched him on the idea. And Kevin really liked it and said, bring it into us. And then along the way, I get this phone call from Steve one day because, I worked with Mick. I had a great time working with him. And freaking Mick Jagger. You never get over the fact that you're sitting in a room with Mick Jagger, We didn't stay in touch. It's not, we don't
You're not texting with Mick Jagger.
Yeah, no, like, hey, man, how's it going? But Steve calls me up. He's like, hey, I was telling Mick about this thing. Mick loves old-time radio and wanted to know if he could come in with us. I'm like, so all of a sudden, it's me and Steve and Mick. And we had to go in and pitch it to Warner Brothers. And the day before the pitch, because it was going to be me and Steve and Victoria Pearman, who's Mick's producing partner, who's amazing. And I'd worked with her on Tabloid. And the day before, get this phone call. It's like, hey, Mick would like to come to the meeting. And like, sure. So Mick comes to the pitch meeting. I think some of the people at Warner's didn't know he was coming because it was so last minute. And in fact, I saw everybody at the security desk and checking in. And I give them my name. They're like, yeah, they go over my rest of my people on there. And they had Steve down. I go, and there are other partners going to be here. Is his name on there? And they go, no, there's nobody else here. What's his name? I go, Mick Jagger. And I remember the two guards, one of them had to explain to the other. It was hilarious. Like, no, like the rock star. Oh, really? Like the rock star? Yeah, like the rock star. Like, okay. so we went in. I still pitched it. It was like Mick was there to. It's the surreal meeting of my life, and here's Mick Jagger to tell you all how great he thinks this idea is.
I was going to say, Mick Jagger is so famous that's the kind of name you might write on something when you don't want to give your real name.
Yeah. But anyway, so Warner's went ahead with it, and we're now we've got a home at Warner Brothers. We've greenlit our first 3 shows. We're just sort of beginning the process of writing them. But it's been great fun because you go to really good writers, and look, you tell them, yeah, you're going to get paid. It's not, you get paid more writing a pilot than you would getting paid to write every episode of a season of your show here. But it's your show. You have creative control. You own it, and you'll have all this facilities behind you. And it's so much fun telling writers they're going to get paid less than they've ever been paid before and work harder than they've ever worked. And their response is, "Holy shit, I can't wait!" But that was my response when Bronzo came my way. It was just so much fun. So yeah, sorry, long answer, but yes. So
no, that sounds really cool. Well, we had one last thing we were going to ask you about, but now it's become 2 things. I don't hear what this Willie Nelson project was. Was it like a biopic or?
No. It was right after History. In fact, it was Cale Loiter again, my exec at New Line, came to me and said, "Look, everyone here's thrilled with the film. We're going to find like a great, big feature for you to work on. But in the meantime, we have this little Willie Nelson fan. Are you a Willie Nelson fan? Would you like to write a Western for Willie Nelson?" Of course I would. And it was actually going to be an honest to God singing cowboy movie. But it was a weird one. And Steve and I met. He was the producer on it, and we've just sort of marveled over the years because it was so. It would have been a blast. It so didn't fit with what a studio film was. Even New Line, which was kind of adventurous and funky, that there was always this sense of like sooner or later they're going to remember that we're doing this and just pull the plug. And I wrote a couple drafts on the thing. Got to spend a summer, on the bus with Willie. I think I sort of remember. It was, and then at a certain point, New Line looked at it and goes, "Oh, yeah, we can't make a singing cowboy movie with Willie Nelson." And that was that. But it was an absolute blast. I mean, Jesus Christ!
I can only imagine.
I can't. Flying off to Kansas City to go hang out with Willie while he's playing a tour of minor league ballparks with Bob Dylan in Kansas. I mean, surreal, amazing experiences that definitely worth the price of the ticket. But it was frustrating because it was a cool script, and it was it wasn't a Gene Autry singing cowboy. We built it. He's a guitar player. He's at bars and he shoots people. But who knows?
Did he smoke weed?
Not the character didn't. No.
That's what I was asking. I know Willie did. All right, Steve, you want to close us out here?
Yeah, I had one more. Were you? Yeah, so I found like a write-up that you were involved with the Todd McFarlane.
McFarlane or?
Oh, McFarlane Wizard of Oz.
McFarlane, sorry, I destroy every name. The Twisted Land of Oz. I know you were involved with an Oz feature. I was just curious about that one.
Yeah, it's again, I guess the statute of limitations. So I had a meeting with general meeting with the producers on that. And again, it wasn't about that. It was about just a general like, come on in, meet these guys. They like your work. And I guess Todd had just come in. He had a bunch of toys. Yeah, I think you just said the name. Was it some dark world of Oz or something?
Twisted Land of Oz.
Twisted Land of Oz. Yeah, like Toto is a big giant man-eating monster. I don't know. And he had pitched them, I guess, an idea of a movie based one. And they were still, I think, reeling. And he came in and just kind of introduced me, like, "Oh yeah, Todd McFarlane was just here. This dark sequel of Wizard of Oz." And it was just one of those things, man. I love the film. I had grown up on the books, and I didn't know anything about the Todd toys. And I just went, "Oh, it'll be a cool sequel to Wizard of Oz." He said, "Did that, the other thing." This thing just sort of fell out, and he went, "Oh my God, that's great! Yeah. You want to develop that?" And I was like, rates do. So it means you can use the golden slipper, the ruby slippers, the yellow brick road, and all that stuff, because that stuff is not strictly from the book. So you can actually make a sequel to the great MGM musical, which would be probably blasphemous, but an interesting challenge. And they bought it, but because there's this sort of sense, because it all was sparked by this conversation that I wasn't there for with Todd, that he would be a producer on it. And so I never met Todd. I've seen some of the toys, but I remember a couple months into it, when it got announced, I just started work on it, and I read this whole interview with Todd McFarlane about his Oz movie and Warner's and how excited he is that the writer of History of Violence is doing his vision. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything. This thing has nothing to do with you. It was just bizarre. And at one point, he called me up and asked me if I wanted to kick some ideas around. And it was this odd thing. I was like, does he not know that I don't quite know? I was like, I'm doing fine, thanks. And that was sort of the extent of our thing. But I kept reading these articles where he would talk about, how I was adapting his stuff and so forth. And literally it had nothing to do with his toys. It was weirdly, it was so it was going to be Dorothy's granddaughter is her grandmother has been fired from her job because she's been telling stories about this fantasy world to the students. She's a teacher, and there is the nephew of the Wicked Witch. Is this? I don't think I was ahead of my time, but actually Joe Dante beat me to this with Gremlins too. But the villain of the Wizard of Oz was basically Donald Trump. He was the nephew of the Wicked Witch, and he had discovered the doorway to Oz in his aunt's old house, and he was developing Oz, basically.
Like
he
building condos and stuff?
Turning it into a theme park that people can go to from here. And as Oz started sort of dying at his hands, we find out that it's linked to our world via the imagination, and people are losing their imaginations here. And so young Dorothy, because that's her name too, has to go to Oz to save it from the Donald Trump character, which means she basically has to get the band back together. And, and it was a really fun project. I remember the opening. I had a Munchkin sort of spy, this kind of James Bond Munchkin being chased by so many years ago. There's a witch who has removable heads in the books.
Oh, who was in Return to Oz?
Yeah. Oh, an amazing film. Yeah. And there's a scene where she's chasing him. He's stolen something from her, and he runs through a room. There's all these heads on in these glass sort of fish bowls, and they're all yelling at him. And he jumps out the window, and you see that he's on this giant mountainside, and he's plunging, and then he pulls a ripcord, and he's got a parachute that has the Oz logo on it, straight out of James Bond. But it was a lot of fun, and it was sort of an attempt to try to do something in the spirit of, the film while keeping faithful to the books. And it was one of those, there's all these things that sort of happen. Remember when there were like 5 Robin Hood movies in development at the same time? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden there were a couple of Oz movies, and somehow Sam Raimi's Robert Downey movie about the backstory of the Wizard of Oz was sort of the one that got made that kind of killed us. But it was a fun project. It was one of those ones that, if I had sat down and really thought, am I going to go out and pitch Wizard of Oz and be like, no one will want to hear my pitch on the Wizard of Oz. But I just sort of lucked into it, and it was a lot of fun. That's one I really wish I got to make. It was a blast.
Maybe a few more years. You never know.
Yeah, it sounds like, because it was weird at that time. It was, Oz the Great and Powerful, because it was before Sam Raimi, it was Sam Mendes with Robert Downey Jr. And then Surrender Dorothy was going to be directed by Drew Barrymore.
That's right. There was, was that? I feel like there was one more, maybe not. But
Universal was going to make Wicked.
Oh yeah. So there were all these Oz things, and but they all had sort of giant attachments, and they just had me. Although we had the original film,
Yeah. Feels valuable.
Yeah.
Or this was going to be called Oz: The Return to the Emerald City.
Maybe.
I mean, that's what it was announced as. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. But it was just the weirdest thing every now and then reading, and then somewhere down the line, like I remember reading an interview with Todd. He was like, what happened to the Oz movie? He's like, I read Olsen's script. And it's like, he just didn't get what I was trying to get.
So, yeah.
I read that too. If you described his, is that Dorothy is going to be like Ripley from Alien. And Conan fan.
God bless you, Todd.
Anyway.
Yeah, sure. No, ours, I mean, literally nothing like that.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you on social media, if you would like anyone?
Oh, God, I just look me up. You'll find me.
Don't check out his podcast.
Yeah,
please check out the podcast, because that is it is such a labor of love, and it's so workable. Joe Dante and I talk to people whose work we admire about the movies they love. It's called The Movies That Made Me, and it's really fun. We've had a lot of friends on, or friends of friends, and every now and then I a couple times now I sort of I go through these fits where I binge watch entire seasons of shows, and twice I fell in love, believe it or not. It's not what you think of when you think of me, I guess. Pose on FX, which is an amazing program, and then also Lodge 49, which was on my God, what was Lodge 49? It was on AMC. Both of which just completely rocked my world. I was like, ooh, and I stalked the creators of those shows and had them. Yeah, it's a blast, and it's conversations with people you may have heard conversations with before, but not this one. We talk about the movies they love, and it's always fun. It's always fun, and it's not work at all. So
no, yeah, I loved your Adam Rifkin episode, and then I also love my favorite movie of last decade was Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning, and you had Scott Adkins on, who's like a favorite actor, and I thought that was so awesome. So
Scott was a blast. That's the fun thing too, is sort of tracking down people like him who are like, you want to talk to me? Like, fuck yeah, I want to talk to you. Scott Adkins is like, he's a great action star. People don't know who he is, and
so underrated.
Yeah, he is, and I think he's on the verge of he'll end up in the right film.
He's that kind of guy. If it's a low budget movie, he's the main character. If it's a big budget movie like Doctor Strange, he's like one of the bad guys.
Yeah, he gets his ass kicked by Captain Marvel or Captain America or something. But he's got Debt Collectors. We had the director of that, Johnson, on as well, who's great. And then he's also like the villain in the new Donnie Yen film, Hitman 4.
And he's the mini boss in Expendables 2.
He's got Debt Collectors. We had the director of that, Jesse Johnson, on as well, who's great. And then he's also he's like the villain in the new Donnie Yen film, Hitman 4.
And he's the mini boss in Expendables 2. His impeachment is awesome. Yeah, I do. Like, one of my favorite actors. I was so happy you had him on.
Yeah, no, he was great. He was great. He couldn't believe we wanted to talk to him. I was like, come on, man. Yeah. Although I believe I'm still. I'm so glad we're all in quarantine, because I did tell him I was going to kick his ass. He said Rocky 2 was better than Rocky. And I'm from Philadelphia, and I don't care if you're a martial arts master. Goddamn it. I'll go down swinging over that one.
That one's still depressing, though. What a Rocky 3 guy.
And you can find us on social media, on Instagram, Best Movies Never Made, on Twitter @NeverMadeFilm. If you like podcasts, check out Josh's podcast. You can also check out our sister podcasts on the Electric Surge Network, like the 430 Movie, Glorious Trek Experts, the Star Wars podcast, The Rebel and the Rogue. We'd also like to thank Bill Ritter, our sound guy, and our producers, Dean Devlin and Mark A. Altman. This is Josh Miller and Steven Scarlatta saying, until next time, we won't see you at the movies. that they thought you were someone else, or was that
No, I was like cooped up. I'm thinking people would. Yeah, and it's not just screenwriter. You got it.
writers, at least ones who've been around since a certain point, love you for your essay. I will not read your fucking script. And how you doing?
Something about the gun
Thank
barrels.
you. How are you guys?
Before we go on, just touching on that essay a little bit, is that the kind of thing where, like, screenwriters still come up to you to this day to tell you that they love you for writing that?
I think it's weird. It's a weird, yeah, it's not just screenwriters. I mean, it's that
Any
thing.
creative person?
Not even creative.
Oh, yeah.
I had a carpenter friend when it first came out thanked me because, it makes perfect sense. It could be, how often people would invite him over to their house for dinner and then take him on a tour that always ended in the room that, has a leaky ceiling or something. That you suddenly realize, oh, yeah.
Makes sense, because that's kind of the point you brought up in the essay, was that people don't think it's rude to ask you to read their script, but you're like, well, that'd be like me asking a dentist, like, hey, can you just look at my teeth real quick?
Exactly.
That does happen to dentists, is the point.
Yeah, and I think it's fun. I mean, most of the response to that has been overwhelmingly positive over the years. I remember Roger Ebert tweeted it out about a year before he died, which was lovely. Every 6 to 9 months, somebody else resurrects it, and usually in a positive way. I've found there are occasionally. Should we wait till that goes by?
Yeah, I was going to say, is air raid happening over there?
If there's a lot of that, I will move inside. God damn it.
Seems like something's happening nearby.
You done? You finished? I'm trying to record here.
Yeah.
I've been cooped up. I'm on a deadline.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Writing, and I've just been cooped up for days. So it's like I'm going to sit on the porch. I mean, every now and then there's some hostility to it, which I understand. A lot of it comes from the title, which is, I suppose, needlessly aggressive. If you read the article, people are always like, "Well, he shouldn't have said that to the guy." Read the article. I didn't say it to the guy. It's I actually read his fucking thing, and that's why I wrote the article. But it's one of those weird things because I just sort of farted it out in response to a thing that happened, and then didn't really know what to do with it, and then a friend of mine was at the Village Voice who was like, hey, yeah, you should let me run it on our blog. And I was like, sure, why not? 200 people might see it. And, and for years he was on me, he's like, do that again. And I'd be like, Tony, you can't do that on purpose,
Get another viral essay.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I remember the day I got up and it was just like, you get on Facebook and the entire newsfeed of Facebook was the same photograph of me and scrolling down forever. Like, what the fuck happened? But, it was interesting. It's a weird thing knowing what's going to be on your gravestone.
It's a long time to read someone's script. It's a pretty big deal.
It is. It's a commitment, and if you want someone to do it seriously, it's time, it's energy, it's all the rest of that, and I do it all the time. It's just what I was, and one of the other things that seems to get lost by people who get offended at the title and don't read the article is so you didn't read anybody's scripts? I'm like, no, I just won't read scripts for complete fucking strangers who walk up to me in public and pigeonhole me into doing work for them, How is that controversial?
You script pimp or something, like one of those. That's what I used to use when I first started writing. I used to pay those companies for them to read me. I get
every now and then there's a working pro who's like, well, I present that, I read for anybody. I'm always like, I'm by nature a fairly nice guy. I always kind of want to just sort of, go on Twitter or something and go, hey, everybody, this guy will read your script. Please send him everything you've got. He's dying to read it. It's like, come on, no, you won't. Nobody will. Nobody does that. Nobody reads scripts for complete fucking strangers.
Well, maybe taking a step back before we start into some unmade movies. Well, I was going to say, maybe just we'll talk briefly.
I'm going to pause, take a quick fiber, and I'll be right back.